Hey, just this game, Euthia. We're doing Euthia. Hey, no, seriously, Euthia. One second. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And today we're reviewing Euthia, Torment of Resurrection from Dia Games. Euthia, large box that it is, large amount of everything that it is, the giant amounts of stacks of tiles and everything that's going on here is an RPG exploration adventure, and I'm realizing that I said I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and you are?
Oh, I'm Jesse from Quackalipe, and this is Devin from Devin Talks Tabletop.
Wait a minute. And you are?
I'm Devin.
From?
I'm just
Say it.
Say it.
I can't do it, guys.
From Devin Talks Tabletop.
There'll be a link down below. When he hits 10K, I'm buying his children a hamster.
I see why you took over
I
him.
don't want a hamster.
Yeah.
I don't want a hamster.
Hamster time. Anyways, this is a review of Euthia Torment of Resurrection, an RPG adventure exploration game that has a variety of scenarios going on. They have a bunch of kind of modular expansion content even within the base game. And, surprise, surprise, they have an upcoming Game Found campaign, which adds a whole bunch of new elements to the game, including some, I believe, some tweaks to the solo cooperative mode as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming, but one big thing is just going to be another chance to get your hands on this with those like solo mode expansions and stuff.
Or with the inserts if you decided to get not the inserts the first time, because if you
need the inserts.
You need the inserts.
They're very, very nice. Now, before we dive too headfirst into this, because you review games for crowdfunding platforms. Fair. Over on my channel, we'll actually have 2 gameplay videos. Both of those are sponsored content, so keep that in mind as you kind of dig into this. But we're going to share our honest thoughts here on Board Game Co's channel.
Yeah, and so that, going back to what I was saying, RPG adventure game with going to be having an iterative number of rounds. Different scenarios will have different endgame objectives or ways you score points or different small rules adjustments to them. And along the way, you have your asymmetric characters that are going to have their own ability trees, their stacks of tiles that you can unlock slowly as you gain points, as you move up the track and start getting all those tiles and getting these various abilities, upgrading your attacks, upgrading your fireballs that you'll be casting, upgrading your gear, your armor, your equipment. Basically, just the word upgrade, the word powers and abilities is going to be left, right, and center in this game. You're going to be using your tokens, your action tokens. So it's going to be
down and to the left.
You're going to be using your action tokens in this game to wander around the map, to interact with, engaging with monsters. It's going to be a big deal because the monsters are constantly and frequently in your way. You can't really engage with the map around them until you take them out, until you protect the tiles around them. You're also going to be going to the various merchants and dealing with all the various goods and stuff that you can get, going back to that whole powers and abilities things. If you want better armor, if you want to hold more gear, if you want necklaces that will give you rerolls and slotting gems and upgrades and all that stuff, you're going to want to go to any one of the 3 different merchant tracks as well. You're also going to be mining for resources. Resources will give you a variety of things, including some of those precious gems that you'll be using to slot into all your stuff. And I think that's going to be hunting for treasure, engaging with encounters. You're going to have a variety of encounters that will come out with unique encounter decks for different areas, giving you different little quests that are going on. Basically, RPG adventure in Euthia.
And money.
You're going to do that until the end of the game. You're going to score points for a variety of things. You're going to have a whole lot of in-game points.
You're going to film B-roll of this.
You're going to have a whole lot of end-game points, and that's basically high-level overview. Any key points I'm missing that we want to touch upon before we dive into it?
I do think that you need to mention the fact that this is a competitive game in which players are actually functioning as the monsters and trying actively to kill the other team when another player fights a monster.
Yeah, this is not a cooperative experience.
It's mean. It's mean.
There is solo play, there is cooperative play, but the core game mode, the main thing that they're focusing on, is the competitive play. Again, you could avoid that if you want, but the main play mode is competitive play, where you take control of monsters as you have different monster encounters, and the other players roll for the monsters, take actions for the monsters, and basically try to kill you with the monsters.
I think the only thing that I would restate or hit on again would be the fact that this game plays on a set of different scenarios that you're running through, and each one of those will actually scale the challenge and difficulty. Not only what you're trying to do on the map, how fast different types of enemies come out, and how quickly you and your character level up. So, while we, in this first gameplay, started early on, we're actually going to be scaling quickly towards kind of a higher end.
And I think in the expansion you mentioned, I haven't played the expansion for context, but you mentioned that the expansion has the opportunity to jump straight into higher.
It jumps us into level 13 or something almost immediately, which is like halfway through your stack.
That's cutting out an hour and a half of your game time to get directly to that, which I think we'll touch upon in the review, but if you've gone through that first hour and a half multiple times, multiple plays, you might find it appealing to skip it. If you haven't, it's fun to go through. We're touching on review territory. Let's go into review territory. territory. Let's start talking about this game.
Are you telling me that in a review video you're starting to touch on review territory?
Eventually, yes.
It's crazy.
Well, in between subscribing to Devin Talks Tabletop, there's something we have to listen to.
And if you want a sense of those two things, so we played this off camera a bit, all went through the rulebook a few times, and then dove into the first scenario, like I said, here on the channel. Because the first thing we wanted to show off was, from ground zero, what the game's introducing you to.
Yeah.
The next thing I'm going to be showing off, the second gameplay, is going to be deeper into the campaign with a little bit more powers and abilities. So if people want to take a look at everything, he keeps doing that. So if people want to take a look at both intro game and also more advanced gameplay, we're going to have that available for you to look at.
Excellent.
Cool.
So, Devin, let's start with you. What do you like about this game?
I think that the hex-based movement is very intriguing to me because it opens up... You get to actively, like, even though the board state is opened up on other players' turns,
Sure.
based off of where they move and where you explore new hexes, even on your turn, if you push to the perimeter, you can actively adapt what you want to do on your turn based off of what comes out. So even if there's not an optimal option nearby you, as long as you're able to move to a place where nearby... If you move to this spot here, every hex around it has to be cleared. So if you then move that spot, you have to always have it surrounded. And so if you always have the opportunity to explore until you make it all the way through the deck. Yep. You have the opportunity to explore and then give yourself new options that maybe no other player had available to them. And I think that diversity of options and strategy for each player on their turn gives you a little bit of control over the narrative of what you're doing, because maybe somebody else opens up an encounter. Maybe somebody else opens up a Dragon Slayer tower. But you might find something on your side. Maybe it's elementals, maybe it's treasure tokens. And I think that option of exploration is really inviting.
It gives you a reason to explore. Have a reason to explore. Yeah. Jesse?
I just dinged.
No, I don't care with that. I'm saying, what do you
I
like?
never ding.
You did just ding.
Stuff that I like about this game, and I actually have quite a few things that I'm very excited about. I'm going to reiterate what Devin said. I really like the exploration. I find that games like this, for instance, Mage Knight and some other titles that expand into this open world, it does exactly what Devin's saying. As you explore farther and farther, things become more and more dangerous, but also more and more doors open up, more pathways that you didn't have before you're playing. And so you'll find that you flip a tile and suddenly you're rethinking how you want to spend your resources. I like the resources that we have.
Weird. When I did that, they'd always give me a hard time about it.
Every tile that we have, that's because he didn't flip anything new, and then he stopped and went, oh, I haven't thought through this. 3 seconds into saying, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to do.
Curiously, after he mocked us for not knowing what we were doing,
another thing that I really like is going to be activation tokens. In your game, you're going to have 3 core activation tokens that function both as your movement resource and also as your mining, your interact with towns, and your fighting ability. And the puzzle of when and where to spend those, how to move around the board as efficiently as possible while still being able to trigger the end effects that you need, I really enjoy. And then finally, I really, really like the character tableaus. I like buying weapons and gear. I like slotting them onto my player board and being able to viscerally see them here. I like gaining little gems and putting them onto the actual tokens that give you rebuffs and health and modifiers. I like the little powers and abilities and the fact that every character has their own asymmetric deck of tokens. That makes me want to play this game with every single one of these characters just to explore all of their levels and all the fun combinations and abilities you get. I really, really like this character building, this profile, this RPG style sort of storytelling.
Yeah.
And the miniatures are great.
Everything we've said so far, the exploration is fun, the exploration is rewarding, it's quick, it's simple, it gives you new stuff to find until the map starts to become found, and then you lose some of that appeal, but that directly drives the fact that it is appealing when you have it. All the character abilities, the tableau building, the giant stack of tiles, keep these far away from Devin, by the way, the giant stack of tiles you can go through, that you can upgrade your character, because one of the things we didn't really talk about is as you level up, you're going to choose a tile that goes onto your board and choose tiles to get rid of. So you're frequently it's not you're just getting stuff, you're making choices, which means it gives you replay value in terms of the way you build out your character, the pathways you pursue. Are you a miner? Are you a fighter? Are you a thief? Are you a haggler? All these different options as far as the way you build out your tableau, customize your character, and of course that works well with the weapons and abilities and all those things you have there as well. The different pathways you're pursuing there lean into what builds you're working on. Are you focusing heavily on mining and then running back to the merchant and selling everything? You want to try to constantly, frequently explore new areas, get your tokens down as many places as possible, but you can choose how you do that. You can interact with elementals. You can interact primarily with a variety of merchants. You can interact with primarily a variety of mines. And the game scoring does reward you to a degree for specializing. The way the points escalate as you specialize heavily in a specific thing. If you're the person interacting with all the merchants, you will miss out on a lot of monster points, but you also will have a lot of points from doing that. So the game gives you the opportunity to diversify, the opportunity to specialize, and it gives you a variety of encounters to mix up the general game state. It gives you all of that in a very accessible experience. Accessible with a caveat, because the rulebook is long, the appendix is long, there's a lot of information to go through, but once you've gone through it and once you have it set up and dive into it, it's a fairly simple procedural and intuitive game. Some edge cases that we'll have to deal with, you may make mistakes here or whatnot, but the gameplay itself, the core gameplay loop is very intuitive, very accessible. This makes it an easy game to not necessarily read the rules yourself, but to teach somebody and then have them understand what's happening as you go through a few turns. And it does so while giving you that very large RPG adventure game. Anything else?
Yeah, I think that said it.
The last thing I want to touch on is going to be the combat. The fact that you're controlling other players' combat cards and you can buff your own ability to buff combat cards, like buff creatures, does lead to some punishing and or really fun moments. Like in the gameplay we just had, I trounced Devin because
absolutely.
I had prepared the entire game to trounce someone, and Devin was in a good position, and I was able to just jump in and squash him.
I don't think I was by the end.
He didn't end in a good position, but that can be bad because it could be a bit of take that, but it can also be a good thing. Like in my case,
that was the decision. I mean, that was a big swing. That was a big swing,
and I did enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
So. You keep that in mind.
Oh, I'm saving combat for the section of things I don't like.
Oh.
But, anyways, which brings us to what we don't like. And I guess with that little tease, I'll start off with that. I didn't like combat. I didn't find it enjoyable. I found it to be tedious. The first few times you go into combat, it's fine. It is what it is. But then the more you engage with it, the more I found it to be a very simple, boring set of back and forth. And the worst part for me, the worst offender, is the fact that as you get abilities that can, in theory, help mitigate or manage that, they're infrequently used. So they don't feel impactful enough across a larger combat. They can be. I mean, all those small little numbers do add up and make differences. But I just felt combat mostly came down to rolling dice, a few modifiers, and on its own, once or twice wouldn't be a big deal. But in a game that does have enough combats going on, both as a bystander, as the attacker, and as a defender, I just found the process to be too boring.
So it may just be because I'm sort of in love with something that I'm discovering now.
Yep.
You have more experience with the game. You've played more times than me. The question for me is, what compared to other systems, like compared to Mage Knight, for instance?
Yeah. Well, I don't think you can compare the combat to Mage Knight.
Well, Mage Knight combat is you show up on the tower and you're playing like a slew of cards from your hand to trigger
monsters
a ton
have more
of effects.
abilities. The monsters are more unique. The deck building, you feel more in control just by the very nature of the fact that you built out your deck. You have your own. I mean, this is not really a comparison to Mage Knight, but they have your own henchmen and other units you can use as well. There's a lot more mitigation, a lot more interesting ways things combine. This game gives you a lot of that stuff, just not in combat.
So I felt like it gave me a lot of modifiers on my board. And I felt like combat was fun when it was on my board, and it was fun when I was trouncing Devin. I do agree with you, though. I don't think combat here is as good as it is in something like Mage Knight. But I don't know that either of them solve the problem of being a bit tedious, a bit fiddly, and a bit kind of mechanics heavy when you get into the late game.
Well, that's the trade-off. The trade-off inherently is that the accessibility of this game does come at a price sometimes, and I feel that price most notably in combat. In the exploration and the general sequencing of everything else, I like it. Again, not to compare it to Mage Knight, but the way Mage Knight you have to relearn a million different symbols and encounters and all that stuff, this is not nearly as complicated in every space being its own unique rule set.
Sure.
But the trade-off for me is where I do feel that simplicity has a lack is combat. That's one of my bigger detractions.
Yeah, for me, I don't really focus in on just combat. I think, and I don't have...
I have more. Just start with combat.
For context, I don't have any experience with Mage Knight, so I don't have a comparison here to make. I think both of you love what Mage Knight could be,
and never
play it, and you're always searching for something that replaces that void but is more accessible.
Yeah.
I don't have that same nuance and experience, and so I'm looking at this for just this, and your complaints about combat are kind of my complaints largely about the experience in general. There's a lot of stuff going on in here. There's a lot of different facets that you have with the exploration, with the combat, with the quests. And I think that I feel like there's maybe more of an experience where I feel like there's quantity over individual, like, I don't want to say quantity over quality, but each piece feels a little bit more diluted because of its adjacency to everything else that's going on. Combat feels not as impactful for me because everything else is also trying to happen at the same time.
Sure.
And so I don't feel like I'm able to dial in on one specific part of this
Sure.
and reap the rewards from that one experience. And so all of it feels like it's vying for attention, and because of that, there's a little bit of noise, and I'm not hearing everything that I want to from this game.
Yeah. Cool. I think one of my biggest things is just going to be the game escalating with higher player counts, and not escalating in terms of time. I think 2 players scales because it gives you more rounds that you have to take. So the time's actually fairly equivalent. The issue is that I am not very invested on your turn, and I'm not very invested on Devin's turn until combat comes into play, and that's
Specifically Devin's turn.
That's two of the criticisms that you
When
won't
I
have.
saw, he was very invested in one of your turns.
When you're playing this 2-player, you get to watch both the buff and debuff. You get to be more active more often, but you also get to see, like, is someone building up gold cards? Is someone holding on to silver?
Yeah.
When are they going to go after me? And I'm not worried about 2 people. I don't have to balance 2 people. I know that I'm facing off against one other individual. So I think if you're trying to play, 3, 4 players, I think you're probably stepping a little bit too far into this being a little bit too mechanics heavy and a little bit too slow on other people's turns, specifically Alex's. Another criticism that I have another criticism that I have is going to be just the nature of some of these games. This, while being more accessible than Mage Knight, is honestly not saying a lot. The organizers, the storage trays, and the way the box goes together is really great to help me get it to the table. But this still takes 30 minutes to set up a scenario. This still takes 15 minutes to break down.
I think it's less than that. If you have the organizers, I think it's less than that.
I have to get my head wrapped around. I have to read the scenario I'm playing. I have to,
once you get, again, this
Sure.
case by case, I think that it's significantly less once you have a few plays.
It may just be that I haven't played it enough to be quick, but
yeah.
Because it's a lot of that first few times is really a lot of just how does it actually work. Once you have it down, the biggest thing is the tile organization for each scenario. Past that, the rest of the stuff, I think you can get out in like 6-7 minutes.
Okay. Well, if you've played more like Alex, you'll have the opportunity to get this to the table quickly. The first few times you get to this table, Devin and I both individually spent about 30 minutes getting stuff set up.
I'm slow, though. I'm also not good at the game, as you can see.
But let me continue on this. This provides a heavy footprint to get off the shelf. It's a big box, takes time to set up, time to learn, and every scenario you're going to play, especially the ones that I think are the most appealing, are actually going to dive you into like mid-game mechanics a lot faster. In the first video that we're going to show off, we play through the intro, which means we're playing through level 1, we're playing through level 2, and they aren't as fun, they aren't as powerful, they aren't as intriguing, they don't let you do as much. But the problem is, if you're not experienced in the game, or you're teaching people who aren't experienced in the game, and you dive in mid-level, you don't know what you want to pick either.
Yeah.
And you don't know how they're going to pair, and you don't know what items you're going for. So there's definitely an accessibility problem here, and I don't have a good solution for it, but it's something that people should be aware of before they put money into it.
Yeah, and that accessibility is my main other critique. In addition to combat from a mechanical stance, the other main thing for me is the accessibility. The setup, the teardown, the sheer amount of stuff you have on the table, the game length. The game length is a huge one. I mean, even the intro scenario with 3 players is going to run you 2 hours plus. Yeah. That's the intro scenario. If you're playing, I think if you're playing like the second scenario or whatnot, again, even if you do just 2 players, you're still looking at 2 hours on the low end, and that's if you limit yourself to a 2-player game. So you're potentially looking at anywhere between 2 to 6, 7, 8 hours, depending on the scenario, player count you dive into it. And I think the problem is that makes some of the potentially the best stuff this game has to offer, it prices it out of the amount of time I'm willing to give it in a session. And so I'm left with only ever really wanting to experience the tip of the iceberg, which means I feel like I'm not getting to the best parts, which means it's a bad trade-off. Yeah. The accessibility is just a bad trade-off because of that game length. While the gameplay is pretty simple, primarily due to my turns, I guess, it just takes forever to actually play through it. It's slow. There's a lot of decision making. I find a lot of the elements very engaging and very fun to build out my character. That whole tableau thing, to choose how to optimize around my turn. My main complaints come down to that combat being uninteresting and the core experience just taking a little bit too long for what it's giving you.
And I think that's probably my final complaint as well, is just time invested. Once you get above 2.5 hours, I start to become very picky about the games that I want to commit that amount of time to.
Yeah.
If this plays in 75 minutes, completely different conversation. But also, if I'm playing it 2.5 hours for the low end of even a 2-player game, then it also comes down to, is the most value I'm getting out of this comes in the second half of that time period once I start to get the abilities and all of that. And if I'm taking a lot of time to ramp up to what feels like the meat of the game and it takes a long time, that's not going to be as appealing for me to have to get through that.
Sure. Yeah, and I like the way you phrase that. The idea that the length of time is not a barrier in and of itself. It's just that you become picky about the games. Because I agree with you. I'll sit down and play a 4-hour game if I love it.
Yeah.
I don't think this feels like a 4-hour experience. I think it took away, like Mage Knight, again, not to compare to Mage Knight, but to compare to Mage Knight, Mage Knight is an experience that, while admittedly I don't play it as much as I should, it is a meatier experience, and it takes those 4 hours, but I feel it gives me a game that's worthy of those 4 hours. I think Euthia is significantly more accessible, significantly easier to table, but it comes at the trade-off of still giving you that longer experience, but for me personally, not the same level of trade-off. Yeah.
For me, I'm just always asking the question, am I ever going to play Mage Knight again without you teaching me?
That's a fair question.
And will I play Euthia? And the
I think you would
the
play
reality
Euthia,
of the
though.
answer is, I think I'm more likely to play Euthia than I am to learn, relearn, and table Mage Knight on my own. I'm talking for myself. Like I'm not the person that knows and learns and rereads Mage Knight. I hate that rule book. I've tried it. I have. I've only ever played it when friends have retaught me, and then I've loved it.
Yeah.
But never enough to commit more.
Yeah. I mean, it's a reasonable complaint. Whether Mage Knight stays or goes is an entirely different conversation. This one's about Euthia. But I guess that brings us to final thoughts. Where are we with the game? Final thoughts and ratings. I guess I'll go ahead and start it off. I like Euthia a lot. I think there's a lot of things this game is doing that is really engaging and really fun. My experience, my pathway, my journey with the game was starting off by reading those 80 pages of rules, which is not a good starting point. It walks me in.
It is a good rule book, though.
It's a good rule book. It's clean.
After you watch 10 minutes of someone else playing first.
Yeah, but it walks me in. My first experience when I read a rule book like that is, okay, great, congratulations, I just read 80 pages of rules. And for context, you kind of need to read the rule book, the appendix, you can reference as you go, but it's still the information you need to kind of see. And I just walk in with the bias of, okay, great, will I ever want to continuously table this? Will this 80 pages of rules, will it be something that I'm willing to dive into again and again compared to any number of other games that aren't Mage Knight, any number of other games that I want to table? And so I walked in biased against it after that. Then I started playing it and immediately had the opposite effect. I had this, this game is too simple. There's not enough interesting stuff going on here. It's just wandering around and a few engagements and nothing else happening until I started to level up. And as I started to level up, the game got better and better. And as I started to see what the game had to offer, the game got better and more enjoyable. And as I continued to play, that hit a peak and started to move back down a bit as some elements got a little repetitive, the combat got a little repetitive. As you dive into longer scenarios, the game length really shows itself. And so I've had this interesting pathway of ups and downs as I go through Euthia, but where I am currently with it is I think it's very good at very many things, and I think it might be the perfect game for some people. If you're someone who likes sitting down for a long Sunday afternoon by yourself and really diving into your own little RPG experience by yourself, with friends, however it is, I think this does a good job doing so. For me, that trade-off of the game length and where it is, I have this one as a 3.5 out of 5 for me. A lot of solid elements, but a lot of areas that just make it something that I'm less likely to table, practically speaking.
Yeah, on my end, I think I know for a fact I like it a little bit more than you. Yeah. But I don't know that I'm drastically different. I mean, it comes down to the accessibility and whether or not I will continue to table this. And if I continue to table it, I believe I have it at a 4 out of 5.
Oh.
But because of the accessibility, I think I'm right there with you at a 3.5 out of 5. I think there's enough reasonable critiques that might make this one that I just don't get off the shelf as often as I personally would like to. I've kind of been through all my thoughts, so I don't need to rehash them. I think 2 players is going to be my preferred player count 100%. Here. I don't really want to play higher than 3, and I would do 3 if I had a group of people that were really excited to dive back in and already knew the rules.
And I don't heavily want to dive in solo, unless, again, context of the expansions might change things, but as of right now, I prefer
Solo, for me, is reliant on the scenarios, and the fact that this next Kickstarter, or the next Game Found, is going to be expanding upon the solo scenarios means that there's something compelling there, but I'm going to wait for the next wave to come in before I really commit to it, right?
Yeah.
So, from my side, I think I'm at a solid 3.5. I really like what's happening here. I really am compelled by the game, and I loved building out my personal player board. But the downtime on your rolls, the downtime while I wait for Alex to go, makes the experience a little bit worse.
I'm not as familiar with how you guys classify your rankings because
you want to go through it, Alex, real quick?
I think 3 though is the one where you think it's a good game that you would not ask to play.
That's about right. The specific nuanced difference between a 3 and 3.5, and I always have it in my rating scale. I don't really go into the detail every time, but it's down if you want to check. The specific nuanced difference between a 3 and a 3.5 is that a 3 is a good game, but I don't need to play it. A 3.5 for me is a game that, if I would never play it again, there's a part of me that's sad that I don't continue to experience that, but I'm also picking other games over that more often than not.
Yeah.
So it has once there's a touch of sadness that I don't get to continue to experience it, then it's a 3.5. And for context, there's many 3.5s that I do keep and continue to play, but that's often the nuanced difference. It's not essential. I don't need it. I may keep it for a variety of factors, but if I didn't play it again, I feel like I'm missing something.
Yeah, for me, this is a game that I can see all of the elements of it that people would enjoy. And I can see, as you guys have said, 2 people or 1 people that would want to jump in with their partner or with a friend group or just by themselves and really explore the system and look at the scenarios and what's going on. For myself, this is not one... I would not want to play this if somebody asked.
Sure.
And it's just because the system doesn't do anything for me in terms of what I typically look for in a game of this length and this mix of complexity plus inaccessibility. Like, I think those two merge somewhere at this type of length of game.
Sure.
Where accessibility and complexity mix up, and it's kind of a gray area of which one is the reason why I pick a certain game at this length. And I appreciate everything that's going on. It's just not one that ever is going to convince me that this is what I would table rather than another experience. So 3 out of 5, 2.5.
If you prefer not to play when somebody asks on our scale, it's more of a 2.5 or yeah.
Yeah, so I would say 2.5 for me. But yeah.
Yeah, that's basically Euthia. We'll have a link to the game found down below. I'll throw a link over to your gameplay, and of course, and obviously, I'll have a link to Devon Talks Tabletop as well. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video.
And I'm buying him a hamster.
Once he hits 10,000 subs, so you can be a part of that journey. Yeah.
Appreciate it, guys. Not the hamster part.